Thank you for consider me as a like very very professional like interviewer.
100%.
Like from
I'm just doing this for the
minute.
Oh, 60 minute. Okay.
That's how serious we are. So
let's go deep.
thank you for accepting our interview. It means a lot to us. So my first question would be coming from a Korean background, right? Korean culture background.
Yeah.
And by the way, did you grow up here in Vancouver?
Yeah, I moved to Langley when I was 2 years old. So, I think most of my Korean culture I got from my parents more than just, back in Korea.
Yeah. So how would you describe your relationship with the city of Vancouver?
Oh, given my Korean background. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think when you grow up from a very young age in a culture that isn't your own, like growing up as a Korean with Korean parents, eating Korean food, talking Korean, but then going to, school where you're surrounded by, at the time Langley was quite white, and so, surrounded by Caucasians and sort of Canadian culture, I think it gives you a very interesting third-party perspective of both. I think when you sort of like a fish recognizing it's in water, if that makes sense. In the sense that like when I think about my work now, I comment on the city, I really, make my whole living off of, describing Vancouver back to itself. And I think my background of growing up sort of, having a foot in two different cultures really gave me perspective to look at our city that way, right? I think it takes to some extent some distance to understand that there are differences between this culture and others to comment on it well.
So the language you use with your family is actually Korean.
I try my best. I'm not gonna lie. I'm definitely my Korean is not my strongest suit, but I've come to really understand it as an important way to continue having a connection with my parents and my culture.
Okay. Now take us back to the beginning of your career as a content creator.
Sure.
So how does the idea strike you? How did you come up with the idea of making content for the city and using YouTube as a channel?
So I would say it really started in university. I went to school for urban planning, so I was learning a lot about, urban planning policy, stuff like, where housing should be built in a city, what should happen with the bus routes throughout a city. And the thing about that, I was learning all this stuff and thinking, everyone should know about these changes because they're impacting everyone's daily lives, right? The decisions that happen by urban planners at City Hall are things that intimately connect with people's sort of everyday experience of their cities. And I also found that there was just so little coverage of it, right? Something that's so important to your daily life, right? Where housing goes, where transit is going, all of this stuff that makes a city, and the decisions surrounding it. And yet there was very little sort of really accessible public information about this stuff. And so, I sort of, I don't know, what's the word here? Let's say innocently ventured into making videos with a really good friend of mine at the time to, talk about some of this stuff. So we made our very first video. Frick, it's 2013.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
It's a decade ago.
Over a decade ago, just talking about the buses in Halifax, because that's where we were going to school at the time. Yeah, but it sort of spiraled from there.
Yeah, we've all watched your videos on your YouTube channel. Where did you get those story ideas? How did you manage to, get those interesting angles?
I think I'm really convinced that stories. There's first off, there's no real formula to finding a story. You come across them in your daily life, right? And so when I get asked how do I come up with a story, I think you have to immerse yourself in groups and settings where stories can come to you. So I maintain a lot of friendships with people who work in urban planning, who comment on it. I make sure to read up on the news, read up on various reports and sort of studies that talk about, how we can design our cities better. And, in doing that, every now and then a story comes to me that I think is worth pursuing. So I think that's what it is like kind of immerse yourself in the ecosystem where you can naturally have stories coming to you. If you go out to the desert, you're not going to find anything. But if you go out to the jungle, maybe there's something there.
Yes. So among those videos, which one would you say is the difficult one to produce or take you the longest time?
I would say anything housing related. It's just I like to say that I have a borderline like mental breakdown anytime I cover a housing story in a more joking way, because like it's just so complicated, right? Housing, I think, has a way of breaking your mind a little bit, because it's kind of like a sweater. You pull on one thread and just like all of society kind of comes unraveling as part of it. And so I think a challenge with any housing story is to talk about a specific part, an angle about housing, without needing to answer the entire question of why we're in the housing crisis. So that's kind of been my strategy, is like, like maybe I can talk about zoning bylaws specifically, or maybe I can talk about the building code, or I can talk about foreign ownership, right? Like, what are certain specific angles you can cover without needing to do the whole thing?
So far you have obviously built a very successful career on this, but have you ever faced any criticism from your content?
I mean, I've got a comment section, absolutely. There's criticism all the
time. Let's hear about that.
Oh, great, yes, let's get into the fun stuff. I mean, like, I think doing any work like this, publishing anything publicly, means you're going to get criticism. It's just a part of the work. And so, to some extent, you develop a very thick skin and sort of a, almost like what's the word? I'm not good at, I've been like teaching, me, I was like, we're at the end of a freaking 5-hour class and I'm like struggling to come up with things. All right, we can cut that out, but okay, I'll just say like negative comments, criticisms is just part of the trade. And I like to, like, to me, at least for me personally, the negative comments barely impact me unless they're actually good feedback, ironically. Because like a lot of people will say stuff like, oh, like, you missed this point or whatever, and then I'm like, in the back of my mind is like, no, I researched that point and I just intentionally left it out of the video because it felt like way too much of a rabbit hole to go down. Or other people will just say like, stupid stuff like, oh, like I don't like the way you look or talk or act on screen, and like, you just learn not to take any of that stuff personally. But the comments that really kind of affect me are the ones that are like, oh, like they actually have a good point. I did miss that, and I want to redo the video now. So there's some nuance to it. I think at the end of the day, though, it's all like feedback is important. I think that's what keeps you grounded. And I try to read through as many of the comments as I have an appetite for, just to kind of get a sense of like, how is this landing with people? Do I need to sometimes reevaluate my own perspective on an issue?
So among all those issues that you have covered, like public washrooms and transit.
Public washrooms was actually a really tough one too. That one almost broke my brain. Yeah. Separate story for another time, but continue. But
I do like the opening of that video where you pretend you just release yourself, right? That's a brilliant idea. So among all of these issues, which one would you say is the urgent one so far for Vancouver?
Oh, what is the most pressing one? That's a tough choice. It's like trying to pick my favorite child. You bring up the public washrooms, and I really think that's one that, feels urgent in the sense that like the problem, if we don't take care of it, becomes so viscerally like impactful. So how much context should I give the camera? Like I made a video about the lack of public bathrooms in North America and all of the consequences that come out as a result of that. And one of the biggest consequences is, of course, how it affects the homeless, community in the city, right? We have a housing crisis. It means there are a lot of people who have no other choice than to find shelter on the streets. And when there are no public bathrooms available, you have no other choice than to also, go use the streets as the bathroom. And I think there are just so many, I think to me that's like so viscerally pressing, right? Like, you can't walk through the downtown east side without having exposure to, human excrement because of this problem. And I think if there was something we could do kind of in the very short term, like I think you could see very immediate results out of just trying to provide quality public bathrooms for the downtown east side. Of course, that's one of so many issues that we have as a city, but like if there's something that you could see immediate payoffs, I think that might be one of them.
Yes. And during our correspondence, you mentioned that you want to address a little bit about inequality problem here in Vancouver, right? Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to get into it. I think this is a big take, but I think there's sort of a real tension at the heart of Vancouver's identity, which is one that is, on one hand, I think we all know the Vancouver that is very aesthetically pleasing. It's this sort of glistening, glassy, urbanist utopia amongst nature. And there's a real romantic, alluring sort of aesthetic to that proposition. And yet at the same time, we know that that is a very expensive, unaffordable part of our city. To live in that sort of setting, it takes money and it takes a lot of resources to make that work. And so on the flip side of Vancouver, we have an incredibly severe homelessness issue and incredible poverty, especially in the downtown east side, but also just more broadly throughout the city. And I think reconciling that has always been, well, maybe not always, but like at least in recent history has been such a struggle. Can we both be a city that is beautiful and has all of this, kind of natural and built beauty to it, while also, taking care of our homeless, right? And taking care of the needy, right? Like, I feel like that's, when I'm a cynic, I feel like they go hand in hand. When the cynical part of me is like, like this beautiful aesthetic of this city is just for the rich. That's what Vancouver's about. And so by necessity, you're going to have people that are left out of that aesthetic. But the more hopeful side of me is like, no, maybe you can reconcile that too. You can have a city that is both, that has such a high quality of life and standard of living, and also is able to take care of the needy within its boundaries.
Yes, homelessness is definitely an issue here. As a newcomer, I was very surprised to see there are so many homeless people, especially on the downtown east side, right?
Yeah.
What do you think is the root of that problem, and do you see a solution or anything close to a solution in the near future?
Oh, yeah, no.
Another big topic.
You're asking the hard-hitting question, 60 minutes for sure. I'll try my best. I'm gonna tell you, like, there's no clear answers to the downtown east side, and there's no clear answers to, why it exists or what it might take to solve it, and what a solution even looks like. But, okay, so in my view, the downtown east side is a result of both the housing that exists in the downtown east side and our efforts as a city to concentrate poverty within that neighborhood. So, the downtown east side, a majority of the housing there is something we call SROs, single resident occupancies. Basically, it's where, every renter in that building has an individual room, but they share a kitchen, they share a bathroom, they share common spaces. So you might have like 20 rooms, each with individual tenants, and then they share a bathroom and a kitchen. And the good thing about that arrangement is that it's very cheap, right? It's way cheaper to do that than to have your own bathroom and your own kitchen and your own living room. But over time, at least what we've seen in the downtown east side, is when you have a concentration of SROs, it concentrates poverty. That's where the cheapest housing is. So that's why the downtown east side has so many. It has a lot of these SROs, and they're affordable, and that's why a lot of people who are down on their luck kind of first move into those SROs, and if they go even further down on their luck, they end up on the streets. The other thing I'll mention there, though, is that, like, you know, Vancouver as a city, we used to allow more of these SROs. We used to allow other types of apartment housing throughout the city, but kind of progressively through its history, you know, starting right from the 1920s, I would say, we banned SROs, apartments, and other types of housing, anything other than a single family house for much of the city, right? If you think anything below, like, you know, 12th Avenue, right? It's what? Houses. It's just houses and their front yards and backyards, right? And legally, that's all you can build in those neighborhoods, right? So before, it used to be that you could have other types of housing throughout the city, but now, no, it's just houses for most of the city. And so because of that, we used to have, like, more affordable housing throughout Vancouver, but now it's like we've concentrated it, right? We haven't allowed it anywhere else. So what happens? It all concentrates in this one neighborhood.
So it sounds to me that only this part is allowed to be ugly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. And then there's a kind of like a compounding factor, right? Because there's a concentration of poverty there, a lot of social services agglomerate in that neighborhood too. So, you know, safe injection sites to other social services. And because of that, more poverty concentrates there again. Like there's sort of like a cycle there.
Yes.
And in some ways you can see that as being a good thing, right? Like if that's where the concentration of poverty is, we want a concentration of social services to come into that neighborhood. At the same time, if it's leading to a vicious cycle, and there's other sort of externalities that arise
it's also
from,
very similar to segregation, right? Rich people live in a certain region, and poor people.
You know what? Your words, not mine. But yeah, I think there's a certain, you know, parallel to at least certainly dividing a city by class and income. So, you know, that's my very rough attempt at telling you what the downtown east side is about. In terms of solutions, I struggle to come up with obvious ones. I think it's complicated, but you know, what the city of Vancouver is trying to do is they're trying to buy up all of these SROs, or not city of Vancouver, the provincial government is trying to buy up all these SROs and turn them into public housing. And hopefully in doing so, you improve the conditions of, you know, that housing and then the lives of the residents there. But it's but you know, they've been trying to do that for decades, and you know, hasn't exactly
for decades, and not a lot of improvement on this issue.
It hasn't improved much, as you can see.
So other than the housing problems, if looking ahead 10, 20 years, is there another trend that is worrying you? Like, where do you see Vancouver is going?
The housing one is an obvious one, but you know, I could point to, you know, I think maybe to go on a more lighter note, or not so light, because we were talking about problems after all. Sea level rise is going to be a critically important issue in Vancouver for the years to come. If you think about like what is one of the most popular attractions in the city, it's the seawall, right? That like continuous loop
because
around.
of the global warming.
Yeah, with global warming and sea level rise, all
and
of
also,
that.
By the way, I have to segue a little bit here.
Sure.
Did you feel the earthquake in the past like 2 weeks? Is it like a frequently happen thing, a common thing, or is it something that's not? It's very unusual here.
Those smaller earthquakes are very common. You know, I think it's a little bit more in the news right now because we had two kind of next to each other.
Weeks, yes.
But of course the real concern is around the big one. If you've heard about the big one, right? We're long due for like a 8 to 9 7.0 on the Richter scale earthquake that, you know, the last time it happened, it was like, it devastated. It created like tsunamis in Japan. Like that's how big it was. Like it started here and then like pushed water all the way to creating, you know, tsunamis in the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So I think that's, you know, one thing. Yeah, like we should have on our radar. Admittedly, like with disasters like that, there's often very little public will and, you know, awareness to really prepare, because like what are we going to do? Like some of the changes to prepare for that earthquake is like we have to upgrade all of our schools that were built before like 1970, all of our road infrastructure built before 1970. And you think about like, you know, the Georgia and Dunsmuir viaducts, for example, like in an earthquake, all that structure would collapse onto the SkyTrain tracks below it, right? So like these are all projects we need to fix, but like when the earthquake is like something that like, you know, it hasn't happened for so long and we just don't know when it happens, I think there's less will, there's less like, you know, political will to fix that infrastructure, because it would cost billions of dollars.
So would you say, from your opinion, Vancouver is not a city that is very well prepared in terms of natural disaster?
I mean, like relatively speaking, it's probably middle of the road. Like, we're certainly no like for like Japan, every building now has gone through an earthquake and has been designed and redesigned to withstand an earthquake. We're not on that level, but we're not like the worst either. Like I know, like, you know, the city has been working over the decades to upgrade all of its schools to be earthquake resistant. You know, the Georgia and Dunsmuir viaduct, there are plans to, you know, demolish them so that they don't have to be subject to an earthquake. Like there's, like certainly anything built after 1970-ish is probably going to be an okay in the earthquake. But anything built before that, that's when we start running into issues and concerns. So, you know, I think we're kind of, again, middle of the road. Yeah.
Okay, so far we have been covering a lot of the problems. Now I want to hear about maybe more positive message. So in recent years, have you seen any change in policies that might have a positive impact on the city?
Oh, man, okay. I think, well, maybe can I start with like one thing I feel like Vancouver is really underrated for. And it might feel a bit cliche, especially for like an Asian studies course, but I think it's kind of incredible how well Vancouver, of all the cities in North America, I think, has made itself such a
melting pot.
Like, a welcoming place for, you know, a diversity of people. Like the fact that it is, like, I think if you were to ask anyone immigrating from India, Korea, Japan, China, where you would want to go in Canada, if you want, or in North America, if you wanted to, like, you know, make a new life somewhere, I think like it would be like Toronto or Vancouver. Like I just can't imagine any other city being able to fit that criteria. And
certainly
I think
not Montreal, right?
Yeah, not Montreal. You know, I've been to Halifax, probably not Halifax. You know, no diss on those cities. Like they're fine cities, but I think Vancouver is incredibly unique and special in that it's made itself a place where people like that feel welcome and feel like they have communities that they can tap into. And I think it's underappreciated because, you know, we're all so sort of stuck on like the city of glass and the, you know, the aesthetic stuff. I think that really isn't its biggest value potential as a city. The city is so successful because there are so many different groups that can identify with this region. You know, there's so many immigrant ethnic groups that like can consider this region as a valid landing pad. And I think it reflects itself on the food scene, on the art scene, like all of these wonderful things happen because Vancouver is an international city. In terms of specific policies, I usually complain about stuff, so.
So you're good at.
I'm very good at, being a reporter or being a, you know, sort of documentarian makes you really good at talking about problems.
Yes.
But, you know, I think one solution I really have loved as an urban planning like student, person, I love like riding bikes. I think people should ride bikes more generally speaking, for all of the various different benefits it has on a city. But one of the big problems increasingly is that students they don't have the opportunity, they don't have necessarily the culture of learning how to ride a bike at an early age. Like that's something we've noticed over the decades is like the percentage of students biking to school has just dropped more and more and more. And
By
so,
the way, what's the average age that children start learning how to bike?
It's a good question. I mean, me personally, I think I started at like 7.
Okay.
But it's probably like around then, like between 7 to like 10, right? Like I don't know. My memory is that people started young, but of course, increasingly that's not the case. Some people don't try cycling until they're an adult in some cases, and it's it's happening for a lot of different factors. Safety comes to mind, culture comes to mind. Certain cultures don't really have cycling as part of it, and learning how to cycle. But a program that I've really felt encouraged by is that many schools throughout Metro Vancouver are starting this this program called the Bike Bus, where like it's basically like students and their parents and other volunteers come together, meet up in a designated location in the morning.
And then they cycle together.
And they cycle together to school. And some of the biggest ones, there's one in Kitsilano that is like sometimes up to 80 students all cycling together to school. And I've just found that to be such a wholesome kind of thing to see happen.
That's a good thing to know. What else? Let's see. Oh, okay. So compare with other Canadian cities, what else do you think Vancouver does well? If you can think of anything, but if no.
I mean, I mentioned the international sort of city aspect of it. So, let's say that's my answer.
Yeah, but also, okay, I'm becoming negative again. It's so expensive to live.
Oh my God, it is.
Do you think inflation is a problem here? And do you think?
I mean, here's the thing. Inflation happens all across Canada. So I don't think it's especially a problem in Vancouver. In many ways, there are many other factors beyond just inflation that make our housing expensive. It's a combination of inflation, our housing regulations that limit how much housing is, built around here. It's our politics around housing. It's our taxes around housing. There's so many different issues that feed into the affordability piece. But I'll tell you this, I think one thing Vancouver, if we're trying to be negative then, one thing that is uniquely difficult about Vancouver, it's not just that it's expensive, it's also that you aren't paid as much here for some reason.
You don't earn enough.
You don't earn enough. Because here's an interesting fact, Seattle and Vancouver actually have pretty similar rents.
Yeah.
In fact, if you go to New York has even higher rents than Vancouver. But the main difference is Seattle and New York pay you more money. Yeah. The average incomes are like, 80,000. In New York, it's definitely above 80. It's like 100,000 USD. In Vancouver, average incomes they're like 65K, right? It's like so not only do we have the affordability challenge, we also have like suppressed wages. Maybe people, I don't know if you've heard of a concept called like the sunshine tax.
No, what's that?
People are willing to take a pay cut to live in areas that are nicer and, just, right? It's like why Calgary pays, like Calgary also has much higher wages than Vancouver, but Vancouver apparently is nicer to live in.
It's called sunshine tax.
Sunshine tax. So people will accept a lower wage to live in an area that they like more.
Also makes sense.
But we in Vancouver, it's like we have like very low wages, maybe because of the sunshine tax, but we also have a really high cost of living, and I think that combination is what makes it feel so painful here, right? It's that equation. Yes. Low wages plus high costs equals depression.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah, low wage, high cost, and depression. Okay, now we are coming to our last question.
Oh my gosh.
So, what role do you think media and storytelling play in terms of shaping the public conversation about urban planning?
you know, this is just a struggle, like a question I grapple with a lot. What I say about like the role of media is that like it both doesn't matter and also it's like the thing that matters the most, right? It doesn't matter in the sense that like a news story or a video I produced has never been like the reason why a policy changed or why, you know, like something happened, right? Like
really, you don't think you like helped at least a little bit to improve the city, or because I know you have been invited as an advisor or something.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Organization
sure.
would
Totally.
ask for your opinion.
But it's always a degree removed, right? And I think it has an impact. But you know, at least kind of in one plane, video storytelling rarely has a tangible impact. It's always intangible, right? A lot of people watch it, and then through many different conversations and cultures and discussions,
long tail effect,
right? Maybe something happens later, right? Like a butterfly flaps his wing, and then a storm happens somewhere across the ocean. Like, I don't know if you've heard of that, like the butterfly effect. Okay, great. So I think that's kind of what storytelling is like it never directly correlates or results in a, you know, thing tangibly changing. But it's also one of the most impactful things in that it almost always lights the fire, right? Like it sparks the conversation. And so, and I think it's one of the few things that actually has the potential to change the course of action of the course of events in a city, right? Like if there weren't stories, like people kind of just being rational actors, like everyone has their own opinions, everyone has their own, you know, ideas of what is right or wrong, and we make decisions in a democracy, and the result is whatever, right? I think stories kind of come in to change that. They change people's opinions. They give people new ideas, and in doing so, we change the course of history. Is my like hypothesis, anyways.
Yes, that's why I think what you do is very important, actually.
I'll take it.
Do you think you are on the radar of those policymakers, and they
I'm sure for some
or
of
do you
them,
have contact with any of them, and you would?
Well, I'll tell you a fun story.
To have a cup of tea or.
So I made a video about
public hearing.
No,
not that
public
one.
hearing was.
But that one, it's also one of my favorite.
Oh, thank you. I did one on single staircase buildings. It's called like Why North America Can't Build Nice Apartments.
Yeah.
I published that video, and I get a text from the housing minister of British Columbia, Ravi Kahlon.
That's really something.
And he asks, you know, like, do you want to get coffee sometime? So I mean, you don't say no to a housing minister.
Yes.
So I got coffee with him, and that's where he offered me the BC housing role, where I sit on the board now, which is kind of crazy. So, you know, I think there's some people that are certainly becoming aware of it. But if I'm honest with you, I don't like to think about that, because it only just makes me anxious.
Yes.
I'm like, I want to focus on the story. I want to have it get out there. I don't want to think too hard about like, oh, well, this person's going to watch it or this person's going to comment on it. Like, there's something kind of freeing in just like you're making it for yourself. Yeah.
So right now your number one tag is still content creator, right? Or how do you define yourself? I think that's the technical label. I certainly like it better than influencer. That's such a cringy title for me. Would you be? I'm sorry, I keep throwing out more questions, but just consider it as a chit chat.
Sure.
Would you be recognized on the road when you just? Did it ever?
It
happen?
depends on the setting. I
try to evaluate how famous you are in the city, because I just got to know you and your channel.
Sure.
But yes, are you like a famous person here?
I don't even know what that means these days. Like, you can get famous for like hook to a girl, like you can just get famous for whatever. But I like to say I have a very comfortable level of fame and a relationship with it. I'm like, most of the time, I'm just an anonymous person. On the bus, nobody recognizes me. It's great.
Yes.
But if I show up at a certain urban planning meeting, yeah, for sure I get recognized, because that's kind of my niche. That's what I like to talk about. So, a lot of urban planners, a lot of politicians, they'll know my work, and they'll often come up and say hi. But but I can also just live my daily life as an anonymous member of society, which is good.
Thank you, Uytae. It's such an honor. Yeah, we are all fans of your channel now, and
Really?
it's
Oh
such
gosh,
a
thank you.
privilege to be able to talk with you for an hour. And yeah.
Well, pleasure's all mine. Yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Before you go, can
Yeah.
you give us some recommendation, like where we can shoot if we want to capture more footage about the housing issue?
Oh.
Like what you just mentioned, SO.
You know, there's always cliche B-roll you can film, you know, both like apartments being constructed, you can film houses, right? They're just all over the city, right? If you want like specific stuff, like stuff that I've like referenced today,
Yes.
I mean, if you dare, you can go to the downtown east side and like film some of that.
Yeah.
Though I will warn you, they're very sensitive about filming there, so just like be careful, I would say. Other things I've
Sensitive,
mentioned.
like those homeless people are sensitive, or those like
The homeless, I mean, yeah, like the people on the street.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember filming there once and like someone like actually threatened me with a knife.
Really?
They were like, yeah, I don't want to be on camera, delete the footage.
Okay.
You know, and you have to, you got to do that.
Wow.
What else did I talk about though?
Public
went a lot.
washroom.
Public bathrooms, yeah.
Public
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of these like automated public bathrooms.
Where did you find that? Like
They're kind of spread out. There's one right next to Main Street Science Road Station.
Mm.
There's a couple. There's one in Davie Village. There used to be one on the downtown east side, and then they got rid of it. I think that stopped recording now, if that's okay. Yeah, so there's some options there.
Yes. Okay.
You know, yeah. So best of luck.